On March 21, 2010, Family Guy opened an episode with a song and dance number about a real dead woman, performed by cartoon children at a preschool play, 10 days before the 5th anniversary of her death, and 3 weeks before her grieving family was set to hold their very first memorial concert in her honor. The song called her a vegetable. The chorus declared that they hated vegetables. Her brother was watching from home. That was not even close to the worst thing this show has ever done. Most people think of Family Guy as a dumb cartoon about a heavy-set father in Rhode Island. What it actually is the most protested, most sued, most banned, most pulled, most apologized for, and most nearly canceled animated series in the history of American television. What follows covers every major scandal from the show's first 25 years, one by one. From the Fox cancellation to the episode that has never once aired on American television. The first story is the cancellation that should have killed it, and it is the one that makes every other scandal on this list possible. When Family Guy was on the air in 1999, 2000, and 2001, Fox did not treat it like a hit. Fox treated it like a problem. And by the time Fox was done with it, the show was dead. Not struggling, not on thin ice, but dead, canceled, finished. The writers were told to clear out. Animators moved on to other jobs. The voice cast began looking for new work. For nearly 3 full years, there was no new Family Guy being made anywhere in the world. If you are watching the show today on Fox on a Sunday night, or streaming it late on Hulu, you are watching something that was meant to be over in 2002. Every banned episode, every lawsuit, every fight with a former governor on live television, every controversy in this account only exists because of what went wrong first. Family Guy came out of the imagination of a young animator named Seth MacFarlane. He was in his mid-20s, working at a cartoon studio, and he had produced 2 short films about a heavy-set father and a talking dog. The first was called The Life of Larry. The second was called Larry and Steve, where Steve was a smart, slightly self-serious dog who behaved more like a person than a pet. Those 2 characters would eventually become Peter and Brian. The people at Fox saw those films, liked them enough, and gave MacFarlane around $50,000 to develop a proper pitch for a full television series. He went home, worked on it, and came back with a short 7-minute demo that he had largely produced by hand in his apartment on a very small budget. Fox said yes. They ordered a full season, and on January 31st, 1999, the very first episode of Family Guy aired on Fox immediately following Super Bowl 33, the game in which the Denver Broncos defeated the Atlanta Falcons with Terrell Davis running over the defense and John Elway collecting his second championship. Getting the slot right after a Super Bowl is one of the greatest gifts a new television program can receive. Tens of millions of people are already sitting on the couch, relaxed, and willing to keep watching. 22 million people tuned in to that first episode. For a brand new cartoon, that was a staggering number. The show was an immediate hit. Reviews were strong. People were repeating lines at school and at work the next morning. By every conventional measure of the television business, this should have been the beginning of a long and smooth run. It was not. Almost immediately after the first season ended, Fox began doing something that has destroyed television shows for decades and continues to destroy them now. They moved it around. They put it on Sunday, then shifted it to Thursday. They stuck it opposite major programs like Frasier, and later against the biggest comedy on the planet at that moment, Friends. They also scheduled it against Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which in the year 2000 was the single most watched program in America. Family Guy had no chance against any of that. Building an audience is hard enough when viewers know where to find a show. When the program keeps jumping between days and time slots and occasionally vanishes from the schedule for weeks with almost no warning, fans stop being able to follow it. ratings fall, and the network then uses those falling ratings as the reason to move the show again, which sends ratings even lower. That loop destroyed Family Guy the first time around. There was also a quieter element to the story that nobody at the time liked to acknowledge openly. Fox already had an animated show on the air. That show was The Simpsons, and it was the biggest cartoon in the history of American television. Family Guy was a new Fox cartoon with a similar general shape, a cartoon family in a small town, a dim father, a sharp kid, jokes about pop culture. For some people at the network, this new arrival felt less like a companion piece to The Simpsons and more like a rival. The writers at The Simpsons, by most accounts, were not pleased with the new show. Years later, The Simpsons would air episodes openly mocking Family Guy for resembling their work too closely. When your own network has a more successful cartoon already running, and the people making that cartoon are openly unhappy about your existence, you are not operating in a friendly building. You are in a quiet fight you never asked for. At the end of the second season, Fox canceled the show. A few months later, they changed their minds and ordered a third season. But the pattern of cancel, revive, cancel had already done its damage. Season 3 came back without the ratings improving. Fox kept shuffling the time slot. And in May of 2002, the network made its final decision. Family Guy was not on the fall schedule. There would be no fourth season. The show was over. One episode made as part of Season 3 was never even permitted to air. It was simply shelved. The head of Fox at the time, Gail Berman, later admitted that canceling the show was among the hardest decisions she had ever made. But the numbers gave her no other reasonable option. For almost any other television series in history, this is where the story ends. The cast goes to other projects. The show becomes a footnote, maybe gets a little affectionate attention years later on a retrospective list somewhere. That is how these things go. That is not how this went. The first strange thing that happened was that Fox tried to sell the rerun rights to another channel and found very little interest. Reruns of even a failed show can usually find a home, but Family Guy was viewed as a property that had already failed twice. Nobody was eager to pay much for it. In the end, Cartoon Network acquired the rerun rights at a price so low that the president of Fox's television division later described it as basically free. Cartoon Network had a late-night programming block for older viewers called Adult Swim, which ran cartoons that were not intended for children. They needed content to fill hours. Family Guy was cheap content that cost almost nothing to acquire. For Fox, selling the rights was a way to recover at least a small amount of money from a show they had given up on. Nobody on either side of that transaction expected much to come of it. Adult Swim started broadcasting the reruns in April of 2003. What happened next is one of the strangest stories in television history. The show that had failed to hold an audience on a major broadcast network became the single most watched program on Adult Swim almost immediately. The number of people watching that late-night block climbed by 239% after Family Guy started airing. Not 2 or 3%, not 20%, 239. Every night, an average of nearly 2 million people tuned in to watch reruns of a show Fox had discarded a year earlier. The audience had been there the whole time. Fox had simply never given the show a real opportunity to find them. Teenagers and college students, the core Adult Swim viewership, had been looking for exactly this kind of cartoon. Loud, crude, full of jokes that felt like they probably should not have been allowed on television. The show had failed in the middle of a family-friendly lineup on a major broadcast network. It thrived on a late-night cable block aimed at young adults. Same show, same episodes, different time slot, different audience, entirely different result. Then came the DVD situation. In April of 2003, right around when Adult Swim began its reruns, The first DVD box set went into stores. It contained the first 2 seasons. DVDs were a significant cultural object in 2003. They were the primary way people watched programs they had missed. There was no Netflix, no Hulu, no streaming of any kind. If you wanted to catch up on a television series, you bought the box set, brought it home, and worked through the discs one at a time. Family Guy fans purchased this DVD set in numbers that made the entire entertainment industry stop and take notice. 400,000 copies sold in the very first month. By year's end, the set had moved 2.2 million copies. It became the best-selling television DVD of the entire year and the second best-selling television DVD of all time up to that point. It outsold box sets for Sex and the City. It outsold box sets for Friends. A cancelled show was outselling some of the biggest hits on television. The only television DVD ahead of it at the time was the debut season of a Comedy Central program called Chappelle's Show, and only by a small margin. The reason this mattered so profoundly is that DVD sales were, in the eyes of the television industry, a direct and honest measure of audience affection. Ratings can be misleading. People leave the television on while doing other things. People forget when a show airs. But purchasing a DVD box set was a deliberate act. You had to walk into a store, pick up the case, carry it to the register, pay money, and take it home. Every single copy that sold represented one person telling the entertainment industry with their own money that they wanted this show to exist. 2.2 million people had just said that about Family Guy. Fox could not ignore that message. At some point during all of this, the people running Fox looked at the Adult Swim numbers, looked at the DVD sales, and understood that they had made one of the most expensive mistakes in the network's history. They had canceled a show that millions of people loved and were willing to pay to own on disc. In May of 2004, Fox announced something that had no precedent in American television history. They were bringing Family Guy back, not moving it to another network, not a limited trial run, but a full and proper 4th season of new episodes on the same network that had buried it. They ordered 35 new episodes immediately. This was the first time in American television history that a show had been revived from cancellation on the strength of DVD sales alone. Every revival that has come since, every fan campaign that has rescued a program, every streaming service that picks up a canceled series is walking a road that Family Guy paved first. The first new episode aired on May 1st, 2005, more than 3 years after the show had been declared dead. Peter opens the episode by reading out a long list of shows Fox had launched and canceled during Family Guy's absence, and concluding that given all those failures, maybe the show stood a chance after all. It was almost the first thing out of his mouth. The point was to rub it in. Fox had canceled him, replaced him with a string of programs nobody remembered, and was now asking him back. Nearly 12 million people watched that night. The show was back. The writers, now holding a huge episode order and an enthusiastic audience, did not return quietly. They came back swinging. This is where the story could offer a clean, happy ending about a show that defeated the odds. But the reason this moment matters is what it did to the personality of the show from that point forward. Family Guy had been canceled by Fox. Family Guy had been saved by fans buying DVDs. The show did not owe its life to the network. It owed its life to its audience. The people making it now understood, in a way very few creative teams ever get to understand, that the network had been wrong about them once and could be wrong about them again. That knowledge gave the writers a kind of confidence that bordered on reckless. If Fox said a joke had gone too far, they had every reason to push back. If an outside group protested an episode, the writers had evidence showing that the audience wanted the version of the show that pushed buttons, not a gentler version. Every creative argument inside the building could now end with the same basic answer. You almost lost this show once by playing it safe. Do not make that mistake again. The team running Family Guy after the revival were not the same people who had been trying to survive on a network that clearly did not want them. They were the people who had beaten Fox. That is a very different kind of creative team. When the show came back, MacFarlane quickly got a second program off the ground at the same network. It was called American Dad, and it premiered right alongside the Family Guy revival on Sunday nights. Fox now had a full block of adult animated comedies, and MacFarlane was their new animation star. A man whose first show had been canceled 3 years earlier was suddenly the most important animation producer at the network. The failure had created the success. The cancellation had created the comeback. Of course, being saved by your audience does not mean the network was suddenly comfortable with everything you wanted to do. There was already an episode from the original run sitting on a shelf at Fox, one that had been completed years earlier and had never been permitted to air. The reasons had nothing to do with ratings or time slots. They had to do with a song, a story about religion, and a fear that the show had finally crossed a line the network was unwilling to follow it across. The second section covers the episode Fox held back for 4 years. One of the 22 episodes produced for Season 3 of Family Guy never reached the air. It sat on a shelf inside a Fox office for nearly 4 years. The people who made it had already finished every element of it. The voice cast had recorded every line. The animation was complete. The music had been mixed and delivered. Fox simply refused to let anyone see it. The episode was called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, and the story of why it was kept back, how it eventually escaped, and the lawsuit it triggered years later is one of the strangest chapters in the entire life of this show. It was also the first real signal of something that would define Family Guy for the rest of its run. The network was afraid of its own program, and the show was about to learn how to fight back. The plot of the episode is straightforward by Family Guy standards. Peter loses the family's savings after buying something called volcano insurance from a con artist operating in Rhode Island. This is a funny premise on its own, because Rhode Island has no volcanoes, and Peter is the only person alive who would be worried about one erupting in his backyard. Lois finds out what happened, becomes furious, and tells Peter he needs to recover the money before their daughter Meg has to attend school without her glasses. Peter is at a loss. He does not know how to handle money. He turns to his friends at the bar, and they tell him that the surest path out of a financial problem is to find a competent accountant, and in their minds, the most reliably competent accountants tend to have Jewish surnames. Peter takes that advice, goes home, looks out his window at the night sky, and sings a song begging for a Jewish person to come into his life and rescue his family. The song was the problem. The song was called I Need a Jew, and it was written to sound almost identical to a very famous Disney song called When You Wish Upon a Star, from the animated film Pinocchio. In Pinocchio, that song is about hope and dreams and wishing for good things. In the Disney original, it is the elderly woodcarver Geppetto who sings it, looking out his window at a star and hoping for a son. In Family Guy, Peter takes the same pose, looks out his window at the same kind of sky, and performs his own version. The melody moves in the same way. The resemblance is unmistakable because that is the whole joke. The warm, wholesome feeling of wishing on a star has been replaced with something far less wholesome. One of the lines in the song was that even though they killed his Lord, Peter needed a Jew. For Fox, that line was the moment everything stopped. The network looked at the song, looked at the episode, and decided that a significant number of viewers would not absorb the intent. They would see an animated father on a Sunday night on a major broadcast network singing about Jewish people in a way that sounded hostile, and even if the show was trying to mock Peter for his ignorance, the recording would still exist. The song would still play. Fox did not want to be the network that aired it. Later in the episode, after Peter befriends his Jewish accountant Max Weinstein and recovers the money, he goes further than he intended. He becomes convinced that Chris would do better in life if he were also Jewish, and so he quietly takes Chris to Las Vegas for an impromptu bar mitzvah. Lois learns about it through Brian the dog and races to Las Vegas to stop the ceremony. The episode ends with Lois delivering the moral directly. She tells Peter that no person's success is determined by their religion, and Peter agrees that he was being foolish. In its own chaotic way, the episode was aiming for a reasonable conclusion. That was the part Fox could not trust the audience to reach. So, in late 2000, they pulled it. Not delayed it, not requested changes. They pulled it entirely. The episode was finished, paid for, and never scheduled. Seth MacFarlane was frustrated. Before the episode went into production, he had shown the script to 2 different rabbis, both of whom approved it because the point of the story was to demonstrate that Peter was wrong, not that Jewish people were a legitimate object of mockery. The writer of the episode, Ricky Blitt, was Jewish himself. The actor playing the Jewish character Max Weinstein was Ben Stein, who is also Jewish, who is publicly proud of his faith, who read the script before agreeing to record the part, and who looked at the same lines that had alarmed Fox and chose to participate anyway. MacFarlane made the case that the episode was not an attack on Jewish people. It was an attack on the kind of person who treats an entire community as a solution to their personal problems. Fox did not move. The episode stayed on the shelf. The show ran a different episode as its season finale and was then canceled not long afterward. For a while, it appeared that When You Wish Upon a Weinstein might never be seen at all. It was a completed cartoon sitting in a locked room inside a dead show with no home and no future. Then the show was canceled, the DVDs were released, reruns started on Adult Swim, and Family Guy came back from the dead. The first place the episode quietly appeared was on DVD. In September of 2003, the 3rd season box set was released with the Weinstein episode included, buried in the set with no announcement. If you bought the DVD, you got it. If you did not, you had no idea it existed. This was the show's careful way of putting the banned episode in front of a smaller paying audience to see whether any serious fallout would follow. It did not. Once the show was a hit again, the question of the missing episode surfaced quickly. Adult Swim wanted to air it. They had an older audience, a later time slot, and an established identity built on running the Stranger material that broadcast television would not touch. In November of 2003, they finally aired When You Wish Upon a Weinstein on television for the first time. Before the episode ran that night, Adult Swim produced a short promotional piece in which the character Stewie addresses the audience directly and announces that Cartoon Network is about to show the episode that Fox had refused to broadcast. The whole thing was presented as a prize for loyal viewers. The episode aired. No disaster followed. No groups stormed the Cartoon Network offices. Most of the people who watched it that night simply found it to be a decent episode with a memorable song and a clear moral at the end, which was that Peter had been foolish and Lois was right, that no person's worth is determined by their religion. The controversy Fox had been anticipating did not materialize. There were a handful of angry letters and a few bloggers who thought it had gone too far. Compared to the catastrophe Fox had been imagining, the reaction was almost nothing. Fox, observing all of this, had to make a choice. Either leave the episode banned indefinitely, which now looked pointless given that it had aired on another network without incident, or finally put it on their own air and move on. In December of 2004, more than 4 full years after it was made, When You Wish Upon a Weinstein finally aired on Fox. One small change was made for broadcast. The line about killing his lord was softened to suggest Peter was not certain they had killed his lord. Everything else remained unchanged. That single edited line became a small artifact of its own. On the DVD, on the original Adult Swim version, and in some later streaming cuts, the original line is still there. On the Fox broadcast version, and in most syndication airings since, the gentler line is used. 2 official versions of the same song now exist in the world. Which one you remember depends almost entirely on where you first watched the episode. That seemed like the end of the story. But the fight over this one episode was not actually done. In October of 2007, a music publishing company called Bourne filed a lawsuit. Bourne owned the rights to When You Wish Upon a Star, the original Disney song from Pinocchio. They had heard I Need a Jew, and they were furious. They claimed that Family Guy had stolen their song, that the parody was a thinly disguised copy with new and hostile words attached to a recognizable melody. They argued that the connection between their classic song and the new Family Guy version was so strong that it damaged the reputation of the original. A lawyer for Bourne told the press that if you listen to how the lyrics were constructed, how the song was positioned in the episode, the very name of the episode, and the way Peter sang out his window at the stars, there was no question at all that Family Guy had used their property. The lawsuit named Fox, Cartoon Network, Seth MacFarlane personally, the production company, and the composer Walter Murphy. Bourne wanted money and wanted the episode removed from every platform carrying it. This was a genuine legal threat. A court could in theory have decided that Family Guy owed millions of dollars and had to stop airing the episode entirely. The stakes were also larger than one episode. If Bourne won, any parody song on any comedy program in the country could become a legal liability. The Simpsons, South Park, Saturday Night Live, every show that had ever made fun of a famous piece of music could be taken to court next. This was not merely a fight over Family Guy. It was a fight over what kinds of jokes American comedies were permitted to make about recognizable music. Fox built their defense around fair use, a provision in American copyright law that protects parody. If you are making fun of a song rather than simply using it to avoid paying licensing fees, the law gives you considerably more freedom. The Fox legal team argued that I Need a Jew was unmistakably a parody. They pointed out that it was commenting on the original song's entire emotional register, that saccharine, everything will work out, feeling that comes with wishing on a star. The Family Guy version took that sweetness and replaced it deliberately with something awkward and uncomfortable to illustrate how childish it is to believe in simple, magical answers to real-world problems. That, the lawyers argued, is what parody looks like. They also pointed to a landmark 1994 case involving the rap group 2 Live Crew and the Roy Orbison song, Oh, Pretty Woman, in which the Supreme Court of the United States had ruled that even a coarse parody of a serious song was protected by the First Amendment. Fox was essentially arguing that the highest court in the country had already settled this question. On March 16, 2009, a federal judge in New York named Deborah Batts delivered her ruling. She sided with Family Guy. In her decision, she wrote that the Family Guy song and the original Disney song were strikingly different in tone. She agreed that I Need a Jew was a genuine parody rather than a straightforward copy. She also made an observation that became notable in copyright law discussions afterward. She said the Disney song had spent years accumulating its association with wholesomeness, and that very reputation was precisely what opened it up to being challenged by people who wanted to push back against it. By being so aggressively clean for so long, the original song had essentially invited someone to come along and invert it. Her ruling also noted that the episode carried a second layer of parody. Walt Disney himself had long been accused by some historians of holding anti-Semitic views, and Family Guy had referenced this history in other episodes. The Weinstein parody could therefore also be read as a comment on the Disney company's own complicated history, which made the parody defense even stronger. Case dismissed. Family Guy had won. An animated sitcom had survived a full federal copyright trial over a 2-minute song in a single episode produced 4 years earlier. The episode that Fox had been too nervous to air had been defended in a court of law and emerged clean on the other side. The ruling also provided a small but real legal precedent for other comedy programs. Other cartoons and comedy writers could now point to the Family Guy case when facing similar challenges. The third section covers the barbershop quartet that enraged AIDS organizations. On June 12, 2005, a Sunday, Family Guy aired the 5th episode of its 4th season. This was the show's big year back. Fox had revived it from cancellation just 6 weeks earlier, and the ratings were strong. The writers were riding a wave of confidence that few people in animated television had experienced in years. The episode that night was primarily about the character Cleveland Brown learning that his wife Loretta had been unfaithful with their neighbor Quagmire. Buried inside that main story was a small side joke lasting under a minute, no more than 50 seconds of screen time. That brief moment became one of the most protested scenes in the show's entire history and turned a quiet Sunday cutaway into a real-world confrontation with some of the most respected public health organizations in the country. Here is what happens. Peter is sitting at his kitchen table talking to Cleveland about how to deliver bad news. Peter claims to have a particular gift for this. He says he once helped a local doctor named Hartman tell a patient something very difficult. The show cuts to a hospital room. A thin man with a dark goatee is lying in bed, looking exhausted and ill. Dr. Hartman stands over him and explains that he does not know how to convey what the man needs to hear, so he has hired someone to do it for him. The door opens. Peter walks in wearing a red and white striped jacket and a straw hat of the kind associated with old-fashioned singing groups. 3 more men in matching outfits follow him in. The 4 of them arrange themselves at the foot of the bed and begin singing a cheerful, harmonized song directly at the dying patient. The song is called "You Have AIDS." The lyrics are unambiguous. Peter sings that he hates to be the one to say it, but the man has AIDS. The other 3 sing it back in agreement. They speculate in song about how he might have contracted the disease, gesturing at his arm to suggest needles and mentioning unprotected sex. They make certain to clarify that this is not HIV. It is full-blown AIDS. They repeat this point several times to be sure he is understood. The song concludes with one of the quartet wishing him luck finding a date. The camera lingers on the patient for a moment. Then, the show cuts back to Peter at the kitchen table. The entire sequence plays out like a cheerful, old-fashioned musical number, complete with small dance steps and bright smiles. This is the part of the show that angered real people in the real world. The people watching at home in June of 2005 included many who had spent years of their lives working to help AIDS patients live longer, reduce the fear and shame that followed a diagnosis, and support families watching someone they loved die from the disease. In 2005, AIDS was still killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Treatments had improved since the 1980s and 1990s, but the disease remained a death sentence for many patients, and it still carried a heavy burden of social judgment. Receiving an AIDS diagnosis was, for many people, one of the most devastating moments of their lives. The first organized response came from AIDS Project Los Angeles, at the time one of the largest AIDS support organizations on the entire west coast of the United States. They ran counseling services, food programs for patients who could not afford meals, helplines for the newly diagnosed, and applied sustained pressure on the government for better AIDS policy. Their executive director was a man named Craig E. Thompson. When the Family Guy song began circulating in discussion, Thompson stepped forward with a public statement. He said a barbershop quartet singing cheerfully about AIDS was about as funny as a song about breast cancer or leukemia. He said it was especially unfunny for the people actually living with the disease. He called it inexcusable for Fox to air a program that made AIDS into a punchline and that quietly reinforced the older idea that the disease was something people had brought on themselves. He said it should be socially unacceptable for that kind of content to pass as entertainment in the year 2005. He was not alone. The AIDS Foundation of Chicago also joined the response. Their associate director, David Muner, took a slightly more measured position. He acknowledged that perhaps the show had been trying to satirize the clumsy, tone-deaf ways that some doctors actually deliver terrible news to patients. Maybe the joke was really about how absurd it would be for anyone to turn a fatal diagnosis into a cheerful song. But he went on. The risk with this kind of joke, he said, is that a great many viewers will miss that meaning entirely. They will see a smiling cartoon character singing the letters AIDS on television and walk away believing the disease has become something acceptable to point at and laugh about. For a health worker spending his days trying to convince people to take the disease seriously enough to get tested, that was a genuine and practical problem. Inside Family Guy, the defense was simple. The people involved with the show said in interviews that the song was intended to be tasteless. That was the whole joke. The point was that the delivery was wildly inappropriate. Nobody was supposed to walk away thinking AIDS was funny. The audience was meant to laugh at how profoundly wrong the delivery was, at how monstrous the mismatch between a cheerful song and a dying patient actually is. The ugliness was the comedy. Fox this time did not pull the episode. They did not delay it. The episode aired again in a rerun on August 14, 2005, about 2 months after its first broadcast. The song stayed in, the dancing stayed in, the patient remained in his bed. This was a significant departure from how Fox had handled the Weinstein episode just a few years earlier. Back then, the network had been so nervous about imagined anger that it buried the episode for 4 years. This time, faced with real and organized anger from real health groups with real political influence, Fox held its position. The strange thing about the You Have AIDS song is how it has lived on inside the show itself. Family Guy regularly revisits its own past jokes. Years later, in an episode where time ran backward, Peter and his barbershop quartet could briefly be seen moonwalking out of the hospital, the song playing in reverse. In another episode, Peter is pulled through a sequence of old gags from the show's history, and You Have AIDS plays in a nearby room as he passes. The writers treat the moment not as a scandal they regret, but as part of the show's own mythology, a notable piece to revisit. The reason this episode matters beyond the song itself is that it taught Family Guy something specific. The Weinstein episode had been stopped before it ever reached an audience. You Have AIDS reached the audience, drew real protests from real health organizations, and survived anyway. Fox did not penalize the show. The ratings did not collapse. The advertisers did not leave in meaningful numbers. This is a very dangerous lesson for a group of comedy writers to absorb. When you push hard and hear loud, justified anger from people with genuine cause to be upset, and then look up a year later and find that nothing has changed about your show, you begin to believe the noise does not matter. You begin to believe you can aim at any target. And the next target Family Guy chose was not a disease or a religion or a cultural stereotype. It was the United States federal government and the specific agency that had the legal authority to fine them into oblivion. The fourth section covers the FCC provocation. On November 6, 2005, a Sunday night, Family Guy aired an episode called PTV. It was the 14th episode of the 4th season, and one of the angriest pieces of television produced anywhere in the country that year. Most fans remember it as the episode with the catchy song about the FCC. That is accurate, but incomplete. What PTV actually was is a public act of defiance aimed directly at the federal government from a cartoon that had been in continuous conflict with regulators, watchdog groups, and its own network since the day it returned to the air. It was a revenge episode. And what makes it strange looking back is that the target of that revenge actually sent the show a letter in response. A real letter from the real federal agency. And what that letter said when it arrived was not what anyone at the show expected. To understand why PTV exists, you have to go back to February 1st, 2004. That was the night of Super Bowl 38. The halftime show featured Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson. At the end of their performance, in an incident that was either a costume malfunction or a planned stunt depending on who is telling the story, Timberlake pulled at a piece of Jackson's outfit, and for less than a second, part of her chest was visible to more than 100 million Americans watching live television. The country's reaction was enormous. The Federal Communications Commission, the agency responsible for regulating American broadcasting, had the power to fine television stations that aired content it deemed indecent. Before that, Super Bowl, the FCC, was already a significant presence in the industry. After it, they became something more aggressive. Over the following months, they issued fines totaling more than $500,000. They raised the maximum penalty a station could face. They began examining every broadcast with new scrutiny. Writers across Hollywood were receiving notes from their networks saying particular lines had to be cut, specific scenes had to be changed, certain words had to be removed. The writers at Family Guy were especially angry for a precise reason. One of the most active organizations pressuring the FCC to crack down was called the Parents Television Council, almost always referred to as the PTC. The PTC had been targeting Family Guy since the program first aired in 1999. By 2005, they had named more than 40 different episodes as the worst show of the week. They had filed formal complaints with the FCC about specific episodes. They had tried to persuade advertisers, including Burger King and the Wrigley Company, to pull their commercials from the show. From the writer's perspective, the PTC had made itself the personal enemy of Family Guy. So Seth MacFarlane and his writers sat down and made an episode about all of it. MacFarlane later said in an interview that the whole episode grew out of pure rage. His exact description was that it came from everything they had been forced to put up with since the moment Janet Jackson appeared on television the way she had. The title PTV was itself a joke. It stood for Peter TV because the plot involves Peter starting his own tiny television network. But the three letters were also clearly chosen as a jab at the Parents Television Council, swapping only the final letter. The entire program was a pointed wink at the group that had been attacking them for years. The plot involves Peter watching an awards show when an actor has a wardrobe accident on stage, a direct substitute for the Janet Jackson moment. The FCC, depicted in the episode as being run by a cartoon villain from the old G.I. Joe cartoons, receives a handful of complaints and decides to punish the entire country by censoring every program on television. They go back and remove classic moments from beloved old series. They start following citizens in the real world and bleeping out their words in ordinary conversation. Peter, fed up with all of it, starts his own uncensored local network where he airs old shows in full and creates new ones that are even more unrestrained. Eventually, his wife Lois is the one who calls the FCC on him. That setup leads to the most famous moment in the episode. Peter, Brian, and Stewie perform a large musical number together, singing about every rule the FCC had put in place. The song is performed in the style of an old Broadway number with tap dancing and broad gestures. At the end, FCC agents burst in and shut the whole thing down. Peter then travels to Washington to argue his case before Congress and wins in a final speech. The episode opened with a 3-minute sequence added at the last minute to fill extra time. MacFarlane and the team needed to pad the episode, and what they came up with was an extended parody of the opening of an old comedy film called The Naked Gun, in which Osama bin Laden is trying to record a threatening video, but keeps breaking into laughter and ruining the take. Then, Stewie appears, resolves the situation, and walks out with a drink. It was designed as a completely self-contained attack on fear and self-seriousness, placed at the front of an episode that was itself an attack on fear and self-seriousness. The choice to open the show this way in 2005, 4 years after September 11th, with American troops still deployed overseas, was in itself a statement. The show was not going to tiptoe around anything. When the episode aired, the writers expected a full confrontation. They expected the FCC to open an investigation. They expected the PTC to demand consequences. They expected Fox to be hit with the largest fine in its history. What actually happened was not what anyone anticipated. The PTC launched exactly the kind of campaign the show had predicted, directing their members to file indecency complaints with the FCC during Sweeps Week, when networks pay the closest attention to ratings. The effort was coordinated and loud. But when examined more carefully, the PTC later could not demonstrate that they had actually filed a formal FCC complaint themselves. Their own website contained no evidence of one being submitted. They made a great deal of noise, but the formal legal action behind the noise was considerably smaller than it appeared. Then, some months later, MacFarlane revealed in an interview that the production team had received something in the mail from the FCC. An actual letter of inquiry from the agency, which is the formal correspondence the FCC sends when investigating a possible violation. Receiving one is normally a frightening experience for a television program. Fines can run into the millions. Broadcast licenses can be put at risk. When the letter arrived, everyone at Family Guy braced for the worst. What they found when they read it and followed up on it surprised them entirely. According to MacFarlane, the people at the FCC had actually found the episode funny. The letter was a routine formality. No real punishment ever came. The show turned the whole situation into something even larger. In 2007, Fox aired a primetime special highlighting the funniest moments in modern television comedy, and PTV was included. That same year, the Primetime Emmy Awards used the FCC song from the episode as part of their opening number, with the characters performing an updated version about the new television season. The Emmy Awards, which is the official celebration of American television, performed an anti-FCC song written as an act of revenge against the United States government on live television. The same agency that could have fined Fox millions for PTV had been outmaneuvered on its own turf. This is where the show's attitude hardened into something new. The Weinstein episode proved a banned joke could come back. The AIDS song proved that real-world protests could not take the show off the air. PTV proved that the United States government itself was not a genuine obstacle. After this, there was no remaining authority that Family Guy was afraid of. Every writer in the room now understood that the ceiling other shows respected did not apply to them. And when a group of comedy writers becomes convinced that nothing can truly stop them, the jokes get bigger, the targets get more famous, and eventually the lawsuits get real. Because while PTV was being celebrated at the Emmys, one of the most beloved entertainers in American history was watching her most famous character get turned into a janitor in a cartoon adult bookstore. And this time, the fight would not be over a song. It would be in federal court. The fifth section covers the Carol Burnett lawsuit. Carol Burnett was 73 years old in the spring of 2007. She had already experienced every form of fame a person can have in American entertainment. She ran her own television variety program for 11 full years, from 1967 to 1978, during the era when variety shows were among the dominant forces in television. The Carol Burnett Show was one of the most honored comedy programs in the entire history of the medium. It won more awards than most people could track. She was celebrated across the whole country. She had a collection of recurring characters that audiences grew to love, small personalities she would inhabit week after week. One of these was called the charwoman, an Old English term for a cleaning woman. Burnett would dress in a worn outfit, carry a mop and bucket, wear a plain blue bonnet, and clean the stage of her program while falling into daydreams that became musical moments. The charwoman was her most famous creation. The actual costume she wore in the role ended up displayed in a museum in Washington, D.C. This was a woman with a documented place in the national story of American entertainment. In April of 2006, Family Guy aired an episode called Peterotica. The main plot involved Peter deciding to write his own erotic novels after coming across one at the library. That plot is not the relevant part of this story. What matters is a scene lasting approximately 18 seconds. Peter and his friends walk into an adult bookstore. Peter expresses concern that the store is going to be unpleasant. His friend Quagmire reassures him because, as Quagmire explains, Carol Burnett works there part-time as a janitor. The camera pans over to show an animated cartoon of Burnett, dressed exactly as the charwoman, mopping the floor of the adult bookstore next to a large bin filled with inflatable products. Playing softly in the background is a recognizably altered version of the Carol Burnett Show theme music. Another character then makes a crude joke referencing something Burnett had done at the close of every episode of her show, which was to tug her ear as a personal signal to her grandmother watching at home. In the Family Guy version, the character suggests she must have been communicating something very different to say goodnight to her father. That is the entire scene. 18 seconds. In almost any other case, a cartoon making a brief joke about a celebrity would be the end of the story. Carol Burnett did not let it go. She filed a lawsuit in United States District Court in Los Angeles in March of 2007. Her lawyers sought $6 million in damages from 20th Century Fox. The charges were substantive. She claimed copyright infringement, asserting that Family Guy had used a character she owned without permission. She claimed trademark infringement, asserting that Family Guy had appropriated something belonging to her established brand. And she claimed a violation of her right of publicity, asserting that Family Guy had used her name and image commercially without her consent. The detail that most angered Burnett came out in the lawsuit documents. Her team said that Family Guy had approached her before the episode aired and asked for official permission to use the music from her program. She had said no. Her lawyers argued that after she refused, the writers went back to the script and rewrote the scene in a way specifically designed to retaliate for her refusal. The ear tug joke, they said, had not been in the original version of the scene. It was added afterward, once Burnett had declined their request. In other words, they were alleging this was personal. Fox pushed back hard. Their public statement was brief and pointed. They noted that Family Guy, like the Carol Burnett Show before it, was built on pop culture parody and jokes about famous people. They expressed genuine surprise that Burnett of all people would take legal action over a short piece of comedy. The point was clear. Burnett had spent her entire career making fun of other famous people. Her old show had dedicated entire sketches to mocking movie stars, singers, politicians, and public figures. The idea that this particular woman was now in federal court over an 18-second joke struck Fox as a strange position to occupy. The studio refused to edit the episode, refused to remove the scene from future broadcasts, and refused to pay anything. It is worth noting that Burnett was not unfamiliar with this kind of fight. In 1981, she had sued the tabloid newspaper, the National Enquirer, after they published a false story claiming she had behaved drunkenly and rudely in a restaurant. She took them to court and won. That case became a small piece of American legal history because it was one of the rare instances of a public figure successfully suing a tabloid. Burnett had gone to court before when she felt a line had been crossed, and she had won. The case was heard by federal judge Dean Pregerson in the Central District of California. Burnett's team argued that Family Guy had gone well beyond what parody law permits. They said the cartoon charwoman was so close to the original, right down to the blue bonnet and the mop, that viewers would mistake it for the real thing. They argued that placing so much of her recognizable work in such a degrading context was not parody. It was theft wearing the costume of a joke. Fox's team cited the same 1994 Supreme Court ruling involving two live crew and Roy Orbison's "Oh, Pretty Woman" that they had used in the Weinstein music case. The court had established that parody by its nature must copy elements of the original, because without those elements, no viewer would recognize what was being mocked. The Family Guy scene was clearly a comment on Burnett's wholesome image and clearly protected under the First Amendment. In June of 2007, Judge Pregerson sided with Fox. The case was dismissed. He wrote in his decision that Carol Burnett was an icon in American culture, which both sides agreed with. But he went on to say that public figures, precisely because of their public standing, become frequent targets of parody and crude humor. He said any sense that certain celebrities were above this kind of treatment had essentially dissolved in the modern media environment. He added that whether a parody is in good taste or bad taste is irrelevant to the law. The only question is whether a reasonable person could recognize it as parody. In his view, the scene clearly qualified. Case closed. Burnett received nothing. Fox paid nothing. The episode continued to air without a single edit. This ruling was considerably more significant than the 18-second scene that produced it. It was a published federal court decision that other courts could reference in similar cases. In practical terms, it meant that Family Guy had now built through its own legal battles a small protective shield that could benefit the show in future disputes. Every celebrity who might consider suing over a similar bit of comedy would now have their lawyers read the Burnett ruling first, see how that case had ended, and in many cases advise their client not to proceed. Burnett later said in interviews that the ear tug joke had hurt her on a personal level. Her real father had been an alcoholic who was largely absent from her childhood. The suggestion that she had used the gesture to say goodnight to him in a crude sexual way was not something she could dismiss as harmless. To her, it was a deliberate crossing of a personal line. To the court, it was protected speech. Both things were true at the same time. And that gap between what the law allows and what feels fair to a real person is a space Family Guy would continue to occupy for many years. The sixth section covers the Sarah Palin Down syndrome controversy. On February 14, 2010, Valentine's Day, Family Guy aired the 12th episode of its 8th season. The episode was called Extra Large Medium. Most of it was about Peter pretending to have psychic abilities after his sons Chris and Stewie become lost in the woods. The side story, the one that would erupt into the loudest public fight the show had in years, involved a date. Chris, the older son, has a crush on a girl at his school named Ellen. Ellen has Down syndrome. Chris decides to ask her out. His younger brother Stewie, who is a baby but speaks like an adult on the show, helps Chris prepare through a musical number called Down Syndrome Girl. Chris takes Ellen out to dinner. Ellen turns out to be rude, demanding, and difficult. The date falls apart. Ellen tells Chris to leave. Inside that side story, there is one line lasting approximately 3 seconds. While Chris and Ellen are getting to know each other, Chris asks what her parents do for a living. Ellen answers that her father is an accountant and her mother is the former governor of Alaska. That is the entire line. It is delivered flatly. The show does not linger on it or call attention to it. On the night the episode aired, around 6.4 million homes in America were watching. Most of those viewers probably laughed and moved on. But in one household, that line landed like a bomb. That household belonged to Sarah Palin. In 2010, Palin was one of the most prominent people in American politics. She had governed Alaska from 2006 to 2009. In 2008, John McCain selected her as his running mate in the presidential election. They lost to Barack Obama. But Palin had emerged from that campaign as a national figure. She had a Fox News presence, best-selling books, paid speaking engagements, and enormous public recognition on both sides of the political divide. Sarah Palin also had a young son named Trig. Trig had been born in April of 2008 and had Down syndrome. Palin had been very public about this during the campaign. She brought Trig on stage at events. She discussed him in speeches. He was part of her public identity. For a large portion of the country, the image of Palin with Trig was one of the most recognizable things about her. So, when a cartoon character with Down syndrome said on primetime television that her mother was the former governor of Alaska, there was no mystery about the target. Every viewer understood immediately what the joke was doing. The first public reply did not come from Palin herself, but from her daughter Bristol. Bristol Palin was 19 years old at the time and already publicly known. 2 days after the episode aired, Bristol posted a lengthy statement on her mother's Facebook page. She called Family Guy a pathetic cartoon show. She called the writers heartless. She said the episode had demonstrated nothing except cruelty. Sarah Palin then appeared on the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News. She said the world was full of cold-hearted people willing to do such things. She asked when enough was going to be enough. She called the episode a kick in the gut. This was not a private celebrity complaint. This was a former vice presidential candidate on live cable news calling out a Fox animated series by name. Seth MacFarlane responded on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. He said the Palin family's anger was not genuine and used the phrase phony pity. He said Palin was performing outrage on behalf of people with Down syndrome when she was really seeking sympathy and attention for herself. Maher agreed and called Palin the queen of fake outrage. Then something unexpected happened. The actress who had voiced Ellen entered the public conversation. Her name was Andrea Faye Friedman. She was 39 years old at the time and had appeared in film and television before, including a prominent role in the 1990s drama Life Goes On. She had never done voice work for an animated program before this, and she had Down syndrome herself. She was a real adult woman living with the same condition as the fictional characters she had played on Family Guy and the same condition as Trig Palin. Friedman sent a written statement to the New York Times. She made clear in her own words that she had not been attacking Sarah Palin's child. She had been attacking Sarah Palin. She said she guessed the former governor did not have a sense of humor. She said she found the line about being the daughter of the former governor of Alaska very funny and pointed out that the word for that kind of joke was sarcasm. She said her own family believed that laughing was good and that her parents had raised her to have a sense of humor and to live a full and normal life. Then she wrote the sentence that became the most quoted line of the entire controversy. She said her own mother had not carried her around under her arm like a loaf of French bread the way former Governor Palin carried her son Trig looking for sympathy and votes. That sentence ran in newspapers, was read on talk radio, and was repeated across every entertainment news program. A real adult woman with Down syndrome, speaking from her own direct experience, had walked into this political dispute and told the former vice presidential candidate through a public letter that her own lived reality carried more weight than Palin's performance of being offended. Friedman later gave interviews to The Insider and ABC News, in which she said again and again that the joke had been aimed at Palin, not at Trig. She said Palin was using her son as a political prop and that Trig deserved to be treated as a normal child rather than as a campaign accessory. When asked whether Palin would ever speak to her directly, Friedman said she doubted it, but that if Palin were ever to be kind to her, she would be kind in return. Palin was now in an untenable position. When the dispute was between her and a cartoon, or between her and Seth MacFarlane, she had something approaching moral high ground in her supporters' eyes. She was a mother defending her young son against wealthy comedy writers. But the voice now coming back at her was a grown woman with Down syndrome saying the exact thing Palin had claimed to want, which was that people with this condition deserved to be treated as fully capable human beings. Friedman was saying she could handle a joke fine. She was saying her family had taught her to laugh. She was saying the problem was not the cartoon. Palin had no good answer to that, and she largely stopped discussing it. The episode also earned a Reel Award nomination. The song Down Syndrome Girl was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award in the category of Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. The television industry itself had looked at the song that sparked the biggest political fight of the show's year and decided it deserved formal recognition. MacFarlane performed the song live at San Diego Comic-Con in July of 2010 before an audience of nearly 4,000 people. The Emmy went to another program, but the nomination was its own statement. Andrea Faye Friedman died in December of 2023 at the age of 53 from complications of Alzheimer's disease. Her role in the Family Guy controversy remained one of the things she was best known for, and she never backed away from her defense of the episode. The 7th section covers the Terry Schiavo musical. Before this section can make full sense, you need to know who Terry Schiavo was. She was a real woman. She was born Teresa Marie Schindler on December 3, 1963, in Pennsylvania. She grew up in a close family, moved to Florida with her husband Michael in the mid-1980s, and worked as a bookkeeper at an insurance company. On February 25, 1990, when she was 26 years old, she collapsed in the hallway of her home in St. Petersburg, Florida. Her heart had stopped. By the time doctors restored it, her brain had gone too long without oxygen. The damage was permanent. She survived, but she never truly regained consciousness. For the next 15 years, she lay in a hospital bed, unable to walk, speak, or care for herself in any way. She was fed through a tube in her stomach. By the assessment of most of the doctors who examined her, her awareness was gone. Her husband Michael eventually said that Terry would not have wanted to continue living in this condition and asked the courts for permission to remove her feeding tube. Her parents, Bob and Mary Schindler, and her siblings Bobby and Suzanne, fought him. They believed she was still responsive. They believed removing her tube would be killing her. The dispute went through Florida state courts, federal courts, and eventually all the way to the United States Congress. President George W. Bush flew back to Washington in the middle of the night to sign a special law concerning her case. Protesters gathered outside her hospice for weeks. News crews maintained a permanent presence nearby. For most of March 2005, Terry Schiavo was the biggest story in America. On March 18, 2005, the courts ordered her feeding tube removed for the final time. On March 31, 2005, 13 days later, she died. She was 41 years old. Her family could not recover from it. In the years following her death, her parents, her brother Bobby, and her sister Suzanne built an organization in her memory called the Terry Schindler Schiavo Foundation. The foundation helped other families facing similar situations, providing legal guidance and advocating for changes in the law. By 2010, the foundation had been running for 5 years, and 5 years was significant because 2010 marked the 5th anniversary of Terry's death. The family was planning something substantial to mark the occasion. They were organizing their first major fundraising concert, a benefit called the Terry Schiavo Life and Hope Concert, featuring country music performers Randy Travis and Colin Ray at the Murat Theater in Indianapolis. The date was set for April 11, 2010. Tickets were already on sale. Bobby Schindler had been traveling across the country for months promoting the event. On March 21, 2010, a Sunday night, 10 days before the 5th anniversary of Terry's death, and 3 weeks before that concert, Family Guy aired the 17th episode of its 8th season. The episode was called Pete Harassment, and its main plot was about Peter being sexually harassed by his boss, Angela. That is the primary story. It has nothing to do with Terry Schiavo. The episode opens, however, with a cold open, the brief scene that plays before the main theme music. On Family Guy, cold opens are often completely unrelated jokes. This one was set at Stewie's preschool, where the children were performing a short play. A sign announced the name of the play. The sign read, Terry Schiavo, the Musical. The curtain opened. A child actor lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and wires and machines of every visible kind. Another child walked out, dressed as Terry's husband, Michael. A chorus of children began to sing. The lyrics described Terry Schiavo as kind of alive. The husband character sang that she was a vegetable. The chorus sang back that they hated vegetables. The song described her as having mashed potato brains, depicted being poured into a bowl. It called her the most expensive plant you will ever see. It ended with a call to pull the plug. The song lasted under a minute. The episode then moved on to its main story. The entire Schiavo sequence was off the screen inside 60 seconds, but those 60 seconds were timed, whether by design or by extraordinary carelessness, to reach the Schindler family at the worst possible moment of their year. 10 days before the anniversary of their daughter and sister's death. 3 weeks before their biggest public fundraiser. With Bobby Schindler actively out in public, trying to draw attention to Terry's memory. Bobby Schindler watched the episode. He released a press statement the following day, on March 22nd, through the foundation. He said his family was astonished by what they had seen. He pointed out something most viewers would not have known. Terry Schiavo was not actually connected to a ventilator or any of the dramatic machinery shown in the cartoon. She was sustained by a simple feeding tube, which had been determined to be the safest way for her to receive nutrition. The Family Guy version had surrounded her with every kind of medical equipment imaginable, which was a cartoon exaggeration of the actual situation. Schindler said the show was not only factually wrong, but appeared to be making a deeper argument, that certain people were simply not worth keeping alive because they represented a burden on the health system. For a family that had spent 15 years fighting exactly that idea, this was a serious accusation. Schindler said the timing could not be accidental. A program the size of Family Guy does not happen to air a piece mocking a specific dead woman 10 days before the anniversary of her death without awareness of the calendar. He called on Fox to cancel the show. He called on disability rights organizations and pro-life groups across the country to join him in pressuring the network. He said the family would be approaching advertisers directly and asking them to remove their commercials from Family Guy. Other organizations joined the response. The American Life League released a statement calling the scene evidence of what it described as a sick culture. A writer at a religious publication called First Things published an essay describing the sequence as hate speech against Terry Schiavo. Disability advocates connected Family Guy to a broader pattern of entertainment that treated people with brain injuries as something less than fully human. Fox said almost nothing. A spokeswoman provided exactly one sentence to reporters who called. Fox is not offering comment on this matter. No apology, no defense, no public statement from Seth MacFarlane specifically about the Schiavo scene, no edits to future airings. The episode continued to broadcast exactly as it had aired and still does today. MacFarlane did address the subject, but only later and in a particular context. On Larry King Live, he was asked about the comparison between Family Guy's treatment of the Schiavo story and South Park's earlier Schiavo episode from 2005. South Park had aired an episode called Best Friends Forever, which used the Schiavo case as a jumping-off point for a story about the character Kenny being left brain-damaged. That South Park episode had won a Primetime Emmy Award. MacFarlane told Larry King he did not understand why he was being attacked for a Schiavo reference when South Park had done something similar and been honored for it. What MacFarlane was missing, or choosing not to engage with, was the difference between the two episodes. South Park had made its episode while Terry was still alive, and had used the case to ask genuine questions about what people with severe brain damage deserve. Family Guy, 5 years after her death, had placed a child actor in her hospital bed with fabricated equipment, surrounded her with a chorus of other children, and had them sing a jingle calling her a plant. South Park had been trying to make a point. Family Guy had made a joke. That is a real distinction. The Terry Schiavo Life and Hope concert went ahead on April 11, 2010, exactly as planned. Randy Travis and Colin Ray performed. Money was raised for the foundation. The Schindler family thanked their supporters. The foundation later renamed itself the Terry Schiavo Life and Hope Network and continues to operate today, taking calls from families facing end-of-life decisions about brain-damaged loved ones. Family Guy had not stopped any of that, but the show had made that particular year, that particular anniversary, harder than it needed to be. Looking back at this controversy in the context of the show's full history, in every other major Family Guy scandal, the show had gained something, won the lawsuit, received an Emmy nomination, got the ratings bump, got the press attention. This time, it is difficult to identify a win. The Schiavo sequence was not nominated for anything. It does not appear on any best of lists. Fans do not quote it. It earned the show another wave of attacks and delivered very little in return. This was perhaps the first indication that the show's ability to convert scandal into fuel was approaching a limit. The 8th section covers the episode America Never Saw. In July of 2009, at Comic-Con in San Diego, Seth MacFarlane stood on stage in front of thousands of Family Guy fans and announced something unusual. He told the crowd that the upcoming season had an episode that Fox was not going to air. The episode had been written. It was being drawn. The voice cast had recorded their parts. Fox had read every page of the script and made a decision before the episode was even finished. The show could make it. The network would never broadcast it. Think about how unusual that is. Most of the time, a network either stops an episode before production begins, or the episode is made and pulled in a panic after someone at the top of the company sees the final cut. This was neither of those things. It was a calm, agreed-upon arrangement. The writers would make their episode. They would simply never be permitted to show it on American television. The subject of the episode, and the reason Fox had drawn this line, was a single word: abortion. This is the story of the one Family Guy episode that has never aired even once on any American television channel, not even today, more than 15 years after it was produced. The episode was titled Partial Terms of Endearment, a pun on the old Hollywood drama Terms of Endearment, with partial referring to a partial pregnancy. The writer was Danny Smith, one of the longest-serving and most trusted members of the Family Guy writing staff, who had been contributing to the program since its very first season. MacFarlane asked Smith to take on this particular story and gave him a specific piece of source material as a guide. He directed Smith to read a chapter from a book published in 1997 by the scientist Carl Sagan called Billions and Billions. That chapter examined the abortion debate and attempted to find common ground between those on opposite sides of the issue, looking at what science indicated about the point at which a developing human being might be considered a person deserving of moral consideration. MacFarlane admired the essay for its intellectual honesty and told Smith to keep it in mind throughout the writing process. The final script referenced Sagan's work several times through the jokes. The plot is more thoughtful than most people would have expected from Family Guy. Lois reconnects with an old college friend named Naomi. Naomi and her husband Dale cannot have children, and they ask Lois to serve as a surrogate mother. Lois agrees. She carries their biological child. Then, while she is pregnant, Naomi and Dale are killed in a car accident. Lois is left carrying a baby whose parents are both dead. She and Peter must decide what to do: keep the baby, place it for adoption, or have an abortion. The middle of the episode is a sustained argument between Lois and Peter about the right course of action. In most sitcoms, this kind of dilemma is resolved through narrative convenience. The character has a miscarriage, or discovers the pregnancy was a false alarm, or the episode simply never returns to the question. This lets the show avoid committing to an actual position. MacFarlane had specifically said in interviews that he found this kind of writing cowardly. He wanted the episode to land on a real ending. Lois and Peter go back and forth for most of the episode. Peter temporarily shifts to the pro-life side after watching a video given to him by a protester outside the clinic. Lois maintains her position. In the final scene, at the family dinner table, Lois begins to speak in a way that suggests she has decided to keep the baby. There is a pause. The family sits quietly. Then Peter turns and looks directly into the camera. He tells the audience that they had the abortion. That is how the episode ends. Fox had been told all of this from the beginning. The network had seen the script, approved the production, and then made its decision about broadcast. The person who explained that decision publicly was Kevin Reilly, who was then president of Fox Entertainment and among the most powerful figures at the network. A month after MacFarlane's Comic-Con announcement, Reilly spoke to the press about why the episode would not air. What he said is worth paying attention to, because it is rare for a network executive to be this candid about the actual reasoning behind a decision of this kind. Reilly did not say the episode was bad. He did not say it was offensive beyond what Family Guy normally produced. He did not say it violated any law or standard. He said the decision was primarily about money. Abortion was the most politically charged subject in American public life. Any program that addressed it directly was going to make advertisers nervous. This was 2009 and 2010, which were very difficult years for the American economy. Companies were reducing their advertising spending across every network. Running a prominent abortion episode on Sunday night could cause advertisers to abandon not only Family Guy, but other Fox programs as well. Reilly even acknowledged that he thought the episode handled its subject competently. His precise words were that it could cause trouble and simply was not worth it. In other words, the episode was stopped not for moral reasons, not for creative reasons, but for business reasons. Fox was choosing its advertising revenue over one episode of one of its most prominent shows. MacFarlane was frustrated. He said to the New York Times that times had really changed and that the network was making a decision based on what they thought the audience could tolerate, and that a woman's right to make her own reproductive choices should be no more off-limits than an episode about gay marriage or an oil spill, both of which the show had done. But despite his frustration, MacFarlane did not mount the kind of sustained fight he might have waged over a different decision. He and his team expected Fox to eventually relent, as Fox had relented and eventually aired the Weinstein episode back in 2004. They thought the episode would find its way onto American television through some channel or another. They were entirely wrong. Adult Swim, the network that had saved Family Guy from cancellation years earlier, was the next logical home. MacFarlane's team approached Cartoon Network. The answer came back quickly. Adult Swim was not going to air it either. A spokesperson said there were no plans to ever broadcast the episode. No explanation, no suggestion that the decision might be revisited, just a firm no. This was a surprise. Adult Swim had built its entire identity on late-night content that other networks would not touch. Yet it also had advertisers, a parent company, and a business to protect. Whatever the real reason was, the episode was not going to Adult Swim. It would later turn out not to be going to FX or FXX either, which were other cable channels carrying old Family Guy episodes. When Family Guy moved onto the streaming service Hulu, the episode was not included. When Disney acquired the company that owned Family Guy and began making old episodes available on Disney Plus in some countries, Partial Terms of Endearment was the single episode not included. Every other banned, sued, protested, criticized, and pulled episode of Family Guy, every single one, has made it back to an American screen in some form. This one never has. Not once, not anywhere. The episode did reach audiences through two other paths. The first was in the United Kingdom. On June 20th, 2010, the BBC broadcast the episode on a channel called BBC 3 as part of its regular run of Family Guy episodes. In Britain, the abortion subject carried different weight with advertisers, and British broadcasting operates under different rules. The BBC is funded primarily by public money rather than advertising revenue, so there are fewer commercial interests to protect. The episode aired in full during its normal time slot. Approximately 1 million British homes watched it. If you live in the UK, you may actually have seen Partial Terms of Endearment on regular television. If you live in the United States, you almost certainly have not. The second path was a DVD. On September 28, 2010, the episode was released as a standalone disc in America, packaged with a comedy special featuring MacFarlane and Alex Borstein, the voice of Lois. It included commentary from MacFarlane, Borstein, writer Danny Smith, and the director. Fans could purchase it if they wanted to see the episode. That was as close as any American viewer could get. The strangeness of the whole situation became clearer as time passed. Fox, the same network that had broadcast the AIDS barbershop song, the Terry Schiavo children's musical, the Carol Burnett adult bookstore scene, and a full musical attack on the United States federal government, drew its line at this one particular episode. A network that had been willing to fight lawsuits, absorb protests, upset health organizations, and embarrass celebrities was not willing to risk its advertising relationships over the word abortion. There is something almost honest about it. Kevin Riley had told the truth. The other controversies had not scared off enough advertisers to damage the network's bottom line. This one might. The people inside Family Guy learned something uncomfortable from this. The show had been built on the belief that pushing harder always paid off eventually. They had now found the one wall that did not move. It was not the government. It was not a celebrity. It was not a health group or a grieving family. It was a Tuesday morning telephone call between a Fox sales team and a breakfast cereal company. That was the real ceiling. As of today, more than 15 years later, Partial Terms of Endearment is still the one Family Guy episode that has never aired on American television. You can purchase it. You can find it if you search for it online. You cannot stream it on Hulu. You cannot watch it on FX. It is the banned episode in every practical sense, even though Fox will never officially use that word. The 9th section covers the transgender backlash. In January of 2010, 4 months before the episode we are about to examine aired, Seth MacFarlane sat down for an interview with a website called After Elton, an LGBT entertainment site where gay and lesbian viewers could read about programs that treated their community with respect. MacFarlane wanted to address his critics. He had been taking heat for years about how Family Guy treated gay characters, for using gay jokes as quick punchlines, for the ways the show sometimes seemed to be laughing at an entire community rather than with it. He said in the interview that it always upset him when he heard the gay community was unhappy with Family Guy because he felt the show was genuinely on their side. Then he made a promise. He told the reporter with evident confidence that there was an episode coming up in the next few months about Quagmire's father. He said he could safely promise that the transgender community was going to be very, very happy with it. He added that it was probably the most sympathetic portrayal of a transgender character that had ever appeared on television. 4 months later, the episode aired. The community MacFarlane had said would be very, very happy was, for the most part, very, very angry. The episode was called Quagmire's Dad. It was the 18th episode of the 8th season of Family Guy, broadcast on May 9, 2010. Seth MacFarlane himself voiced the main guest character. To understand why the episode hit the way it did, you need some background on Quagmire. Glenn Quagmire is the Griffin family's next-door neighbor. His entire personality on the show is built around a single defining characteristic, which is that he is almost cartoonishly focused on sexual pursuit. Viewers had been watching him for more than 10 seasons and had developed a particular affection for the character in the strange way that audience members sometimes do with even the most morally questionable recurring figures. When the show brought Quagmire's father on for the first time, it set up the introduction carefully. Dan Quagmire was presented as a decorated Navy veteran, a war hero with a long distinguished career. In his first scene, Quagmire invites Peter and Joe over to meet his father. As Quagmire tells stories about Dan's service, the stories begin to sound a little different than Quagmire realizes. Every story seems to conclude with Dan in a particularly close relationship with a fellow soldier. Peter and Joe quietly read the signals Quagmire cannot or will not see. Then comes the revelation. Dan sits his son down and tells him he is not gay. He is a woman who has spent her life in a male body and has now decided to undergo gender confirmation surgery and begin living as herself. She will take the name Ida. Quagmire does not know how to absorb this. In one of the most frequently quoted lines from the episode, Quagmire essentially begs his father to please just be gay instead. He can deal with gay. He cannot deal with this. In the next scene, Dan enters a hospital as a man and walks out moments later as a woman with all physical changes complete, as if the process were a quick appointment rather than a lengthy and complex medical journey. The surgery sequence is where many transgender viewers first began to feel uncomfortable. In reality, gender transition involves years of careful medical steps, extended counseling, and a gradual process of adjustment. The show compressed all of it into a single cartoon moment. Ida then comes to dinner at the Griffin house. The dinner is framed as a welcoming occasion. Peter asks wildly inappropriate questions about her surgery in graphic detail. Ida answers openly. Later in the episode, Lois takes food that Ida had brought as a gift and privately tells Meg to throw it in the trash. This throwaway detail, presented with no dramatic emphasis, was the first thing that hit many LGBT viewers particularly hard. Lois Griffin, the moderate and reasonable voice of the show, treats Ida's food as contaminated without making a scene about it. The casualness of the rejection is what stings. Then comes the scene that turned the episode into a genuine controversy. Brian Griffin, the family dog who functions as the most adult member of the household, has been away at a seminar during all of Dan and Ida's story. He does not know any of it. He comes home, stops at a hotel bar, and meets an attractive woman. They connect. They go back to her room and sleep together. The next morning, Brian returns home glowing, telling Stewie he has found a real connection. Stewie asks her name. Brian says her name is Ida. Stewie looks at him for a moment and then tells Brian exactly who Ida is. Brian's expression changes. He runs to the bathroom, and then on screen, for 30 uninterrupted seconds, Brian vomits. The floor fills. His body continues. The camera does not cut away. No scene change. 30 full seconds of a character reacting with physical revulsion because he has just learned he slept with a transgender woman. After the vomiting finally stops, Brian delivers a line that became the most quoted thing from the entire controversy. He shouts that when transgender people move to a new neighborhood, they are supposed to tell the people living there, framing it as though the disclosure were a legal obligation comparable to sex offender registration requirements. The response the following day was fast and organized. GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, which at the time was the most prominent LGBT media watchdog organization in America, released an official statement. GLAAD said they shared the serious concerns being expressed by transgender community members and agreed those concerns were valid. A reviewer named Brent Hardinger, writing for After Elton, the same website where McFarlane had given his optimistic interview just 4 months earlier, wrote a detailed and harsh assessment. He said it was simply impossible for him to reconcile the promise McFarlane had made with what the episode actually was. His only available explanation was that McFarlane must be completely mistaken about what a sympathetic portrayal looks like. The Parents Television Council, the conservative watchdog group that had been in open conflict with Family Guy for over a decade, also named the episode their worst show of the week. This created one of the more unusual alignments in the show's history. GLAAD on the left and the PTC on the right had both concluded, from entirely different directions and for entirely different reasons, that the same episode had been a failure. Fox did not pull the episode. It aired in full and has continued to air since. What makes this episode distinctive in the show's controversy history is how McFarlane responded. In most of the confrontations we have covered, he pushed back hard, defended the work publicly, and usually won the argument, at least in the court of public opinion. Here, he doubled down in a way that made things worse. In September of 2010, speaking to a men's magazine called Details, McFarlane said he did not encounter many unintelligent gay people, implying his critics were unusual for a community he generally found sharp. He said he still believed Ida was a sympathetic portrayal. Then, he defended the vomiting scene by saying that if a straight man personally discovered he had slept with a transgender woman, he might vomit, in the same way a gay man might be disturbed by a comparable encounter with a woman. That explanation, published in a major national magazine by the creator of the show, effectively told transgender women that their existence was, in McFarlane's own framework, something a straight man would reasonably vomit over. The apology his critics were looking for was not coming. The defense he offered was, in the eyes of many people, considerably worse than saying nothing at all. It is worth noting that the episode was not entirely without moments that some transgender viewers later acknowledged. Ida is written as a genuine war hero. She is brave. She describes her reasons for transitioning simply and honestly, saying she had to choose between a happy life or a miserable one. At the end of the episode, Quagmire, after all his initial resistance, tells his father that he loves her. That final scene is played straight. No jokes, no gags. A son telling his transgender parent that he loves her on primetime network television in 2010. For some viewers, that ending mattered. It was not enough to rescue the episode in their estimation, but it was real. The problem was that almost nobody was discussing that ending because the vomiting scene, the sex offender comparison, the thrown away food, and the instant cartoon surgery were what had made the news. Ida continued to appear on Family Guy in subsequent seasons. She became a regular presence in Quagmire's world. Other characters came to know and treat her with basic respect. The show made gradual attempts over time to handle the character it had introduced so badly with more care. but the damage of that first episode persisted. For many people, Quagmire's Dad remained the episode they reached for when wanting to illustrate the ways Family Guy sometimes fell short when it attempted to treat something real with seriousness. The show acknowledged this direction of change openly. Years later, in 2019, during an episode called Trump Guy, Peter Griffin said directly on screen that Family Guy was trying to phase out gay jokes. The show's executive producers confirmed this was a real and deliberate editorial shift, stating that what had been acceptable comedy 20 years earlier did not operate the same way anymore. The 10th section covers the Boston Marathon, Brian's death, and the modern era. The year 2013 was the year Family Guy, for the first time in its entire run, experienced two major controversies simultaneously, in the same program, in the same calendar year, that had almost nothing to do with each other. One came from a real-world tragedy the show had nothing to do with, but got pulled into anyway. The other came from the writers themselves, planned deliberately to shake up the program. Neither ended the way the writers expected. Both, in different ways, marked the end of an era in how this cartoon operated. By the close of 2013, the people making Family Guy had absorbed a lesson that more than a decade of protests, lawsuits, and banned episodes had not managed to teach them. Some lines cannot be pushed without cost. Some fans will not forgive certain choices. And the internet by 2013 had developed capabilities that were fundamentally different from anything the show had previously encountered. The first crisis of 2013 began with an episode called Turban Cowboy. It was the 15th episode of the 11th season and aired on March 17, 2013. The plot is simple. Peter takes up skydiving with his friends. Things go wrong. He ends up in the hospital and meets a Muslim man in the next bed named Mahmoud. Peter and Mahmoud get along. Peter begins spending time with Mahmoud and his social circle, learns some basics about Islam, and briefly converts. What Peter does not realize, and what the audience gradually understands, is that Mahmoud and his friends are part of a terrorist group planning to blow up a bridge. The episode ends with Peter accidentally triggering the bomb through a cell phone call and the bridge exploding. The episode received mixed reviews. Critics described it as tone-deaf and lazy. Nearly 5 million people watched it that Sunday night, which was enough to beat The Simpsons in the ratings. A few days passed. Fans debated whether it had gone too far. Nothing unusual for Family Guy. Then came April 15, 2013. At around 2:49 in the afternoon on that day, 2 homemade bombs detonated near the finish line of the real Boston Marathon. They were pressure cooker devices planted by 2 brothers. They went off about 14 seconds apart. 3 people died: an 8-year-old boy named Martin Richard, a 29-year-old woman named Crystal Campbell, and a 23-year-old graduate student from China named Lingzi Liu. Hundreds more were injured. Many lost limbs. The entire country watched the news in horror through the rest of that day. By the following day, something damaging was happening online. The Turban Cowboy episode contained a separate cutaway gag, completely unrelated to the main plot, in which Peter is depicted winning the Boston Marathon by driving his car through the race course and hitting the other runners. The scene is absurdist cartoon violence lasting a few seconds. In the original episode, this Boston Marathon cutaway appears in one section of the program. The scene in which Peter's phone accidentally triggers a bomb appears near the end, in an entirely different storyline. The 2 scenes are approximately 15 minutes apart. They have nothing to do with each other. Someone online took those 2 scenes, cut everything between them, and posted the result as a single clip. The edited version made it appear that Peter had triggered explosives at the Boston Marathon itself. Once the clip was online, conspiracy thinking took over. The person most responsible for amplifying it was a radio host named Alex Jones, who ran a website called InfoWars. Jones had spent his career arguing that many of the worst events in American history were fabricated or staged by the government. He took the edited Family Guy clip and posted it to his platform on the afternoon after the bombing, suggesting it as evidence that someone in Hollywood or in the government had known the attack was coming in advance. His millions of followers shared the clip. It spread to people who had no interest in conspiracy theories and who watched it and momentarily believed it. MacFarlane did not stay quiet. The day after the bombing, he posted publicly calling the edited clip abhorrent, describing the attack as a crime and a tragedy, and expressing his thoughts for the victims. He did this knowing the clip would continue to spread regardless. Fox acted quickly as well. The network pulled Turban Cowboy from its website within hours. Hulu took it down. Amazon removed it from their digital store. YouTube removed the edited clip on the basis that it was deliberately deceptive. Fox said it had no immediate plans to rebroadcast the episode. Alex Jones was not done. After MacFarlane's public statement, Jones pushed back, pointing out that Family Guy had made a cartoon containing jokes about the Boston Marathon and images of runners being injured, and arguing that MacFarlane could not simply distance himself from that material because real people had died. This was the most effective part of what Jones was doing. The Boston Marathon cutaway was real. It had actually aired. He was using a true thing to sell a false thing. The two scenes that had been stitched together each existed independently. The connection between them was manufactured, but because the component parts were real, the deception was harder to expose quickly to people who had not seen the original episode. Turban Cowboy remained off Hulu for more than 9 years. It was finally added back in September of 2022. The second crisis of 2013 was entirely of the show's own making. It happened on November 24, 2013. That night, Family Guy aired an episode called Life of Brian. It was the 6th episode of the 12th season. The plot begins with Brian and Stewie on a time travel trip to early America. They return home safely. Stewie, exhausted by the repeated problems that come with time travel, decides to destroy his time machine permanently. Then Brian and Stewie go out to the street to play. A car comes around the corner. Brian is struck. The family rushes him to the veterinarian. On the operating table, surrounded by the Griffins, Brian tells each family member he loves them. He tells them they gave him a wonderful life. Then, his body goes still. A month later, the family visits a pet store and brings home a new dog, an Italian-American talking dog voiced by Tony Sirico from The Sopranos, named Vinny. The episode ends with Stewie and Vinny beginning to form a connection over their shared loss. The message was clear. Brian Griffin, who had been on Family Guy since the very first episode in January of 1999, was dead. He was not coming back. The reaction was unlike anything Family Guy had ever produced before. Social media filled with grief. Adults who had grown up watching this fictional dog were genuinely upset. A petition on change.org asking the show to bring Brian back collected more than 100,000 signatures within days. Fans wrote extended pieces about what the character had meant to them. Brian was, in many ways, the show's intellectual and emotional center. He was the one who read books. He was the one who engaged with ideas. He was the one who argued with Stewie about philosophy. Killing him felt to the audience like a betrayal of something they had invested in over many years. MacFarlane said in interviews given in January of 2014 that the team had anticipated a small wave of complaints, but that the intensity of what actually came was something they had not prepared for. The writer Steve Callahan, in an interview with a television news outlet, explained the creative reasoning. The idea had come up in the writer's room as a way to shake up the show and explore how the Griffins would handle grief. They had planned several episodes around Brian being gone. They had brought Tony Sirico in to voice Vinny. None of them had anticipated the scale of the response. Fans called for boycotts. Thousands canceled Hulu subscriptions. The show's ratings the week after Brian's death actually increased because viewers wanted to know what was happening. But the fury did not subside. The show reversed course. 2 episodes later, on December 15, 2013, Family Guy aired a Christmas episode in which Stewie finds a way to travel back in time to the moment Brian was struck by the car. He pushes Brian out of the way just in time. Brian lives. The entire timeline resets. Vinny goes back to the pet store. The grief is undone. The arc from death to funeral to replacement dog to resurrection had lasted less than a month across 3 episodes. After the reversal, MacFarlane posted publicly thanking fans for caring so much about the dog, adding that anyone who had genuinely believed the show would kill Brian off permanently would have to be really out of their minds. For many fans, that statement made everything worse. If the writers had never intended Brian to stay dead, then the entire arc had been a deliberate emotional manipulation, and the fans had been the ones used to generate the publicity. Both the Boston Marathon situation and the Brian death controversy shared a common quality. They moved faster than anything the show had previously encountered. The fake turban cowboy video went from appearing online to becoming a national conspiracy story within 24 hours of the real bombing. The Brian death arc went from on-screen moment to massive organized protest to reversal in under 3 weeks. These were not the old-style controversies where advocacy groups drafted letters over weeks and organized press campaigns over months. These were fast, digitally native, audience-driven events that the program had not been built to handle. Family Guy had learned how to fight the FCC. It had learned how to beat lawsuits. It had learned how to outlast advocacy groups. The writers did not yet know how to manage a situation where millions of connected fans could respond instantly and collectively to a creative decision. After 2013, the show quietly became something different. Not in the number of episodes it produced, which kept coming, but in the scale and nature of its controversies. The period from 1999 to 2013 had been one sustained cycle of banned episodes, lawsuits, protests, government inquiries, and political battles. After 2013, the confrontations became thinner and less frequent. Fewer episodes were pulled. Fewer lawsuits were filed. Fewer organizations mounted sustained campaigns. Part of this change reflects the show settling into a long and comfortable middle period. Part of it reflects the broader shift in how people consume television, with viewers moving to streaming and culture moving on to new conflicts. Part of it reflects MacFarlane himself stepping back from the day-to-day operations, with other writers taking over and the program becoming somewhat smoother and less combative. In 2019, Peter Griffin said directly on screen that Family Guy was trying to phase out gay jokes. The show's new executive producers confirmed this was real. What had been acceptable comedy 2 decades earlier, they said, did not function the same way anymore. The Family Guy that airs on Fox today, more than 25 years after its premiere following Super Bowl 33 in January of 1999, is a different kind of show from the one that spent its first decade fighting everything in sight. It still makes jokes that go wrong. It still appears on annual lists of the best and worst things on television. But it does not make the news the way it used to. Fox no longer holds episodes back for 4 years out of fear. AIDS organizations no longer mount organized protests. Carol Burnett is no longer filing federal lawsuits. The FCC no longer sends letters of inquiry. Sarah Palin no longer appears on Fox News, calling the show a kick in the gut. The Schindler family no longer releases press statements about song and dance numbers mocking their sister. The show is still on the air. Its biggest scandals are largely behind it. For a cartoon that was killed by its own network at the age of 3, that survived because of DVD sales and late-night cable reruns, that learned to fight back against Hollywood, against the federal government, against health charities, against grieving families, and against its own audience. And that kept going through every single one of those fights. That is not a bad place to end up.